So I say thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. We're here today with Adam Rubin and Claide Kaido. And so excited to have you both. And so we'll start by having you both introduce yourself. Adam, if you want to go first, and then just give it alphabetical order then, I guess. So
Sure. So my name is Adam Rubin. I've been with the Detroit Pistons for the last 8.5 years. The first 4 years I spent in content and video production, and then the last 4 years I have run all aspects of our esports division.
Hi, everyone. My name's Claire. I actually met Adam in the NBA 2K League days. So my name's Claide Kaido. I'm actually a graduate of the Ohio State University, very proudly, born and raised outside of Columbus. So thank you all for having me. But yeah, so I started my career actually in the Ohio State football offices in traditional sports. Under Tressel and Meyer and Fickle. And then I moved to New York, worked for MSG Sports for the Knicks, Rangers, Liberty, the sports side of Madison Square Garden. And then recently moved over to OSNYC, which is a video game bar and lounge in New York City, and launched a talent agency for esports athletes. So yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Hunter.
yeah, great. Thank you guys. So to get started, so I'll go to Adam. So Adam, could you tell everyone a little bit about the 2K League and about Pistons, what we do with the Pistons gaming team?
Yeah, so the NBA 2K League was founded in 2017. There were 17 inaugural NBA teams that joined in, and the NBA viewed it as an opportunity to engage with a younger audience and add a fourth league underneath their umbrella. So they've got the NBA, the WNBA, the G League, and now they've got the NBA 2K League. It operates on a 4.5 to 5 month season where teams compete against the other 16 teams in the league in season 1 in games of 5v5 on the NBA video game NBA 2K. We're now entering our 5th season with 24 teams. 22 of those teams are NBA-owned franchises. And then we've got 2 non-NBA franchises, one based out of Shanghai and the other based out of Mexico City, who are endemic esports brands that saw the value of the NBA 2K League brand and wanted to join in. Hunter worked with me for the last 8 months in the Pistons organization on our data analytics and business intelligence team, helping to build out a stats tracking database and scouting tool for Pistons GT, utilizing similar methods we've done on the traditional basketball side, trying to connect the dots between how the NBA does business and how the NBA 2K League can further its scouting tools.
Great, thank you, Adam. So Claire, I'd love to hear about how your experience with the 2K League compared with the Knicks.
Yeah, so I'm like, where do we even start, Adam? How do we even yeah, so launched Knicks Gaming within the Knicks umbrella, and very similarly to what Adam is saying, the New York Knicks organization saw it as an extension, not only into the esports space, which obviously the numbers speak for itself, but also to reach the next generation of Knicks fans. So when I was there, I was much more, although I was overseeing the property, I was much more on the business side. So Adam's probably your go-to for any on the virtual court data and analytics, how those were used. I was grateful enough to have an awesome head coach named Kyle Rudy who handled all of that on the Knicks gaming team. But how we used it was how we converted people who were casual gamers in 2K specifically, and how we converted them to fans. Not only of Knicks gaming, but then of the larger Knicks organization. So speaking to data specifically, that's kind of was more my focus, was the business side and how it affected like our overall profit and loss of the business.
Awesome, great, thank you. And so I guess I'll follow up on that and kind of talk about what Adam touched on in that. So my experience at the 2K League is this summer, like Adam mentioned, I worked under him in the business intelligence department, and I kind of helped create like a database for our gaming team. And so with that, we, looked at all the games from the league and our practices and things like that, and kind of looked for trends and tried to do some analysis like from the data, see what we could find, see what outliers were out there, and things like that. And then from there, we kind of took it to the next step and kind of like, used it for like a scouting and evaluation metric. And so like we kind of took everything in that we had and wanted to see like, okay, like what makes a good player, what makes someone good, I guess, if that's, and so like with that, we took all our stats and things like that and kind of compiled them into, like some overarching stats that, kind of captured all player metrics in one. And so with that, we can use that for things like our evaluation of ourselves, how we did in a certain game or, a tournament or things like that. Or you can average it out over a season to see how, our team compared to other teams throughout the season. And then like also it's, the same metric can be used for things like scouting. And so like it can be applied to the more general based like 2K players like Claire had mentioned, and like, see how they compare to people in the league and see, okay, like, maybe this is a good prospect. He's putting up some good numbers. Like, maybe we should take a look at him. So things like that was kind of like what my role with the 2K league was. So with that, Claire, I just wanted to say, so obviously what you do now with OSNYC is definitely a lot different than what you did at the Knicks. I wanted to hear like what kind of similarities and differences are there between the two? Obviously both in esports, but both very different. And so would love to hear about what you do with OSNYC and like, how it compares.
Yeah. So the comparison and the day-to-day is quite similar as far as like if anyone here is like interested in this as a career path. So, I was the director of business of operations of our Westchester Knicks team, which is our G League team of the New York Knicks. And then also the director of business ops for Knicks Gaming, which essentially is like the GM of the business side, right? Like made no player decisions, wasn't necessarily responsible for wins or losses, although we did win the season 1 championship, which I will take pride in until I die. But I can't take credit for it. That was all of our guys and the coach. So then on the OSNYC side, it's a brick and mortar like retail location, right? So different in the sense of what the actual function of the business is, and definitely different from the sense of one is obviously a mega sports conglomerate, one of the most famous in the world, and the other is a very like has a very solid brand, amazing, but small business entrepreneur that we continue to grow. So it is a very different like day to day that way, but generally oversight of the properties and the role is the same. So I guess to answer your question, what does that look like, or how do we use data? It's not different really from the business perspective. You look at who your target audience is. You obviously have to use data analytics to pull those metrics. And then with OSNYC, we're very so much in a test and learn space. I laugh a lot with people who, they hear the word like DNA, data analytics, whatever, and they think, oh my gosh, these all like heavy software, which is obviously the case, right? In some instances, but also it's like you can tweet something and know pretty quick from like a data perspective based on likes, reshares, comments, or whatever, if it is doing well or not. So that's also a data metric for us as well that we use. But my focus is really on marketing the space, growing the space, bringing events to the space. And obviously I'm using data to understand who our target market is, and then not only marketing to them, but then also trying to understand what that next layer of data is, like who is that next layer of like, maybe it's not a pro esports player, right? Like to your point, Hunter, we have a lot of like competitive tournaments in the space. It's natural. A lot of people who are gamers will come to the space and say, oh my gosh, I can host my tournament here. I can host my Smash Ultimate tournament here. We're having a Nick All-Stars Brawl tournament like next Sunday, which is going to be crazy. But also likely too, we have people come off the, just walk in and like, oh, what is this? This looks cool. I want to get a drink and I want to play Mario Kart, which is also totally cool, right? So it's like understanding those two different markets and how to market to them based on the data that we have.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So I guess, Adam, I know you've touched on it a little bit, but how would you say that the Pistons gaming team uses analytics both on a game-to-game basis and season long?
Yeah, I think on our end, especially from a coach and player perspective, we hit it from two different angles. With players over the last 4 years, we've noticed that players are slightly against analytics, as are most professional athletes. They believe in the eye test rather than what the numbers are showing, or they'll look at the numbers and not understand how to interpret them. So one of the things Hunter and I worked on this season was actually involving the players in the process of gathering the information and essentially creating a player score where we took all the players' input on what they valued as important and what they didn't care about, and adjusted the stats accordingly, so that as we're spitting out the information and we're bringing it to them, they felt that they had value and input in the process. From a coaching side, we actually take a look at our opponents and how they're playing the game, from how many times they're shooting from the left hash to how many times they're going in for a layup versus pulling back for a 3-point shot, how many times a point guard's going left versus right. So from a scouting perspective, it's very much tracking every movement on the court. From the marketing side, it's going through on a weekly basis and finding out, okay, what were our highest engaged posts? What were our lowest engaged posts? Okay, we're getting a ton of traction on our post-game stats graphic that has no sponsor attached to it, but our sponsored content, which is our halftime report, is getting zero traction and no engagements. So let's change the sponsor logo to the end of game score so that the sponsor's getting the engagements and click-throughs so that they're getting their value. So from a social standpoint, it's finding out where our sponsors essentially are spending money and making sure we're creating value for them. And if we're not, how can we quickly adjust? From a team standpoint, it's educating players and making sure our coach is prepared. And then from a marketing standpoint, it's looking at both sides, right? It's finding out, okay, what content can we make off of our scouting? Can we take the information we're providing to our head coach and our players about how we're scouting the other team? And can we create any cool content with it that can be a value added to partners? Or is it not going to hit the market that we're trying to promote to, essentially?
All right, thank you. And so I guess, yeah, how I would, I guess, give my input on that, how I guess I used analytics with the Pistons gaming team. And so one thing I'll say is, like, one thing we did a lot of is we did a lot of different, like, obviously we did those metrics that I referred to earlier, but we also did some different, like, visuals that I think were really key. And so, I remember that we used, it was MicroStrategy. And so we created different, which is just a business intelligence software. But we created different visualizations that we then could show to, I know we showed the coach and some of the players and things like that, and just shows, like, okay, in the first quarter we come out really slow, but then, like, we really pick it up by, like, the third quarter or something like that, and so, like, kind of just different ways to visualize things was kind of one aspect I focused on, because, like, especially with player buy-in not being that high, it can, a lot of times I find that visuals can, like, really help. And so, like, I know when we talk to the players that, like, however we get them to buy in, like, we try to, do what we could to get that. So whatever we could do to kind of make that, like, transition easier is kind of, like, what we aim for there. So
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? For at least our esports athletes and even pro NBA athletes, they all use data and analytics. They just may not know that they're actually using it. And by presenting the information and shot charts to them and player move selections, if you will, how many times they go left versus how many times they go right, that's all analytics that we've pulled and we've put into our system. But the players don't know that's what it is. A player's mind, when they hear data and analytics, is a spreadsheet. They think you're going to spit out numbers to them. So if you can create a report for them in a visual sense, it's a graph, it's a chart, that they can look at and understand how many times a player is going left versus right. Even the shot chart with the X's and O's for basketball games, they don't view that as data and analytics. They just view that as the visual, the eye test. That's what a player's doing. So it's really taking all the information and marketing it to our athletes in a way that they are going to be receptive to. And I think that was Hunter's largest task this summer, is trying to figure out how we can get the players to buy into the information he was providing.
For sure, I'd have to agree. So with that, I'll turn to Claire. So obviously you've been involved with a lot of different realms of esports. Like, how would you say that with like the different avenues of esports that you've been in, like what kind of analytics or stats have been used, whether it's like from a business aspect or from a kind of like reaction time aspect of like, I know a lot of like more of like the first person shooter games and stuff like that. Reaction time is key. I didn't know if any of that has been used at OSNYC or with your talent evaluation company, or whether it's like in-game stats, kind of like me and Adam were referring to with like the 2K League. So however, like, whatever stats you've used throughout your esports, I guess, career, if you'll say, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so at MSG, it was largely driven towards partnership and sponsorship performance is how we used a lot of data and analytics. Because to be candid with this group, and I think, there've been a couple articles circulating in the esports industry lately about profitability of esports orgs at the moment. So one of the largest revenue streams for esports organizations and gaming organizations as a whole is sponsorships and partnerships, right? So we heavily relied on data and analytics to prove the value of those partnerships, which ultimately was making the organizations profitable, like within that, like Knicks Gaming, have you. So, I had an awesome opportunity to be a support system for Counter Logic Gaming. So Madison Square Garden acquired a part of Counter Logic Gaming. Oh gosh, don't quote me here, but I feel like it was 2017, maybe. But I had the awesome opportunity to go to Culver City in LA and understand how they're using data analytics. So that's more along the lines, obviously, is what you and Adam are talking through. So from an OSNYC standpoint, I think other than the points already made, there's a software called GG Leap, which is installed on PCs. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it pulls a lot of data on this person played this game for this many hours, or this person, then at this point in the game switched over to Valorant or switched over to whatever, right? And so those stats are really awesome for us to have, because we can say, all right, the number one game played in the space right now is Valorant, or like the number one game played in the space right now is Smash. So that kind of gives us a little bit of a like tip to maybe we should host a Valorant tournament, right? It might give us more opportunity to bring more people into the space. So little things like that. On a day-to-day basis, we also use a point of sale system and the venue called Square. You guys, I'm sure you guys use it every day. It's in almost every local business at this point, but Square provides a lot of backend data on who's coming in and out of your space. So we can easily say that the people walking into our space are 18 to 26, 80% male, 20% female. And again, that's just data that informs us to make better business decisions based on who actually our customer is.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And so, okay, with that, I'll go back to Adam and say, how do you see, like, where do you see, I guess, stats and analytics in like the 2K League going from here? So, obviously, at least I would say it seems like it's kind of more in the beginning stages, but where do you see it going? Like, what do you think is like the next step for analytics in the 2K League?
Yeah, I think the number one way we're going to use analytics long-term in the 2K League, not just Pistons, but league-wide, is going to be content and marketing. To Claire's point, I'd say 90+% of at least NBA 2K League team revenue is coming from partnerships. So every time we're pitching a partner, we have to show the metrics on where their view is going to come from, what's the engagement rate, how are we going to make sure they're getting enough impressions. And then it's also from a content standpoint of telling stories. Every time we put up a graphic on who the player of the game is, we're using data from the game. And as we go and create content around who we're going to draft and who we're going to trade and who we're going to protect in terms of an expansion draft, a lot of it is going to come from content. Now, that's not to say teams won't use it from an evaluation and a scouting perspective, but as a whole, we are operating underneath the behemoth of an NBA organization or an entertainment company that happens to have an NBA team. If you look at Madison Square Garden Company, right? Like they own billions in entertainment and they own an NBA team, right? Like the Pistons own an NBA team, we own a G League team, we own a state-of-the-art performance center, and we own a 2K League team. So from a business standpoint, it's going to continue as it is now and just continue to get better in terms of how we analyze the information we're pulling in for our partners and our sponsors and our fans, especially as we start to gain more information from Twitch and our broadcast partners about who's watching. Because as we get more information about who's watching our games, that's going to tweak how we're advertising to our partners and how we're trying to get people to come in and watch. And then on a scouting standpoint, teams will start to buy in as the talent pool thins out. We're still very, very early in the league history. So we're still on a backlog of getting the best players as people know them into the NBA 2K League. There were only 102 players allowed in season one. And since then, we've seen anywhere from 30 to 60 draft picks every year, but only about 20 new players. So we're entering season 5. We're just about at the tail end of the original talent in the NBA 2K community, if you will, the people who've been playing since 2014 when it started to become a competitive game. Now we're getting into the era of the new kids who are 15, 16, 17, just now becoming eligible, who've been around for a couple of years. There's not a ton of historical data on them. So now you really have to put in the work and do your homework to find out, okay, is this player great or is it the people he or she is playing with? And I think that in the next 3 to 4 years is going to be the monumental shift from, okay, I've been watching you for 5 years and I know you're good and you're 25 to, okay, you're just turned 18, you're now eligible, you just graduated high school. What are your skill sets? What are your stats like? How do you play the game? Because it's still always going to be the eye test in terms of convincing players and some of the older coaches who come from the community. But I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of a stats side to convincing players and showing them that if done properly, you can truly break down the eye test into numbers. And I think that's where in the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to start to see teams adjust from, okay, I know your name to, okay, you can do this and there's data behind it.
All right, just a quick follow-up on that, just because, it popped in my head. Do you see, like, I kind of think of, like, with 2K, there's a lot of, like, okay, I think of it like the shooting, right? You need to try and time it perfectly. Do you think that there will ever be, like a timing metrics? Like, okay, like, he, like, gets the green bar, like, 87% of the time, and he only gets it, like, 49% of the time. And, like, do you think that, like, I guess, like, I know that a lot of esports, like, their analytics and stats is very, like, reaction time and stuff like that, but that's more on the shooter side, and where there's less of a team aspect. So, like, obviously a lot of our scouting and stuff was very team based. How can we, like, elevate the team, and how can we, like, maximize them working together with each other? Or, like, do you think there will ever be a day and time where it is more individual based, in that it's more like reaction times, like shooting percentage, in the sense of, like, probability of hitting, like, the green line and things like that. Do you see that coming into the game?
Yeah, so there's a company right now that was actually founded by a good friend of ours called Cody. The company is NBA 2K Lab. It was founded by Cody Parent, who's now the senior director of esports for the Indiana Pacers. And the NBA 2K Lab company actually created modified controllers and equipment that correctly tracks the shot timers down to the millisecond to tell you the front end and back end of a perfect release. So the equipment is just now starting to be created that allows for that. Obviously, there are game modifiers that can record a like certain button depression for a certain amount of time, and you're essentially hacking the game. And there's a company called Michigan Esports that's owned by Cinch Gaming, which is a controller manufacturer, that just came out with a software called eStats, short for esports stats. And it's actually a USB pass-through that connects to a laptop that tracks every single button depression and how long you're holding it down versus releasing it, the trigger angle. So that's now coming on. And as Claire pointed out, there's probably a couple hundred different softwares that you can use for PC gaming that is tracking how long you're doing certain items. So it's still very much in its infancy. We will get there though, because right now we're still going off of the point guard or center knows the animations in the game, because 2K is unique in that it is an animation based game where sometimes you're stuck doing a move for a second and a half or 2 seconds, and it's up to the player to understand that length of time. I do think we'll get to a point in the next couple of years where now you can actually pull true information. How long are you timing your shot? Because we know that green window, and the green window is the perfect release time. So you're guaranteed to make the shot. So we know that green window. It starts at 86 milliseconds and goes to 116 milliseconds. We know that for this jump shot, and each jump shot is different, not dissimilar to every NBA player's jump shot is different. So we know the windows, and we can know how often they're making a green release because they get a little animation, but we don't know if they miss it early, how close they were. We don't know if they miss it late, how close they were. And that's information that the developer has, but they don't yet have a way to deliver it to teams. So again, that's something in the next couple of years we're hopeful for, because the technology's there. Now it's just figuring out the best way to deliver it without straining dev resources and without divulging industry secrets behind Take-Two Interactive and Rockstar's programming.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. So to Claire, I guess I'll ask you a similar question. How do you see, like, I guess, stats and analytics growing in esports in the future? And so with that, like, obviously from the business aspect, I think it's like clearly going to continue to grow, but from like what you're seeing from the more like player and like reaction time stuff like that, like, and different kind of player metrics, both in your like agents talent like agency and at OSNYC, how do you see that continuing to grow?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of different influencers and content creators and professional players across a lot of different spaces. So I think it is hard to generalize, but I think in any industry right now, every part of our world is being tracked. And so, like, I get on my phone and it's like, hey, you've been on here too long. And I'm like, okay, leave me alone. I know, you know what I mean? So it's like, I think how we see data and analytics grow in general, like I'm sorry, Hunter, I hate to be so like generalized about the answer, because I don't know that I have a very specific answer for esports in general. But I think as we see it more integrated, more digital interactions just integrated in our life across the board, even the way we've all done meetings and conferences like this and whatever over the course of the last 2 years. I mean, I think the pandemic has also like vaulted us into a space where we're forced to now all interact digitally, and it's forever changed how we interact. And honestly, better connection, right? Because there's probably no chance that I could have been in Ohio to do this, but because you've set it up this way, I can participate. So that's more of like a digital reference than it is data and analytics. But I mean, with this right now, I can see how many participants there are. I can see how many people raise their hand, right? Like every single one of these things is a data point that can help make better informed business decisions. I'd say from a player representation perspective, let's say one of my players like does a post on, I don't know, beer and alcohol, let's say that, right? And the interaction is low, my gut would tell me to not, and the data, not even just my intuition, but the data would tell me to not probably go after like beer and alcohol partners for this person, right? That's honestly like very basic, but
No, that's the
but
answer.
like I guess that's how it will work. And then I just think that, you know, inherently our world is changing around us each day, and like I think you have to adapt in order to stay relevant. So
That's great. No, I like that answer a lot. So I have one last question for both of you. And so where do you see esports being in 10 years from now? Not necessarily in an analytics standpoint, but just general, like where do you see esports being 10 years from now? Do you see it in like, do you think it will have like TV deals? Like, are we going to see it on ESPN and Sports Center and things like that? Is it going to get that big? Like, where do you guys see, where's the future at? So I'll start with Adam and then I'll go to you, Claire.
Yeah, I'm going to end up teeing up Claire perfectly on this one. I think what we're going to end up seeing with esports in general is just an overall acceptance of gaming and culture and electronics in general. I mean, look at where we were with pro sports 20 years ago. Like look where the WNBA was 20 years ago. There was no G League, there was no Major League Lacrosse, there was no Premier Lacrosse League, there was no MLS. Like pro sports in the last 20 years have now become a mainstay of entertainment. And gaming for the last 30 years has been a shunned topic of, oh, you play video games, and it's almost been like jocks versus gamers. And now we're seeing that jocks are gamers and everyone's a gamer, and it's opening up business opportunities similar to what Claire is doing in New York City with OS. It's opening up opportunities for professional athletes to become entertainers in gaming. And I think esports as a whole, you're still going to have competitive gaming the same way we've got professional basketball, professional baseball, professional football, or soccer, depending on how you want to phrase it. We're still going to have professional gaming, and it's going to grow into its own entertainment category. I mean, if you look at the international, they're giving out $42 million in prizing for Dota 2 on a yearly basis because of in-game transactions. It's not going anywhere. But what it's going to do is it's going to have a monumental shift in our society's culture to where this is now an entirely new business venture, the same way we have pro sports now, but we didn't 30 years ago. And I think that's where this is going. And then it's very quickly going to catapult into social, into content, into streaming. Like we're on that decade path of regular TV's gone. Now it's streaming services. Now it's free streaming services and entertainment. Now it's a easy, instant access to your personalities through Twitch and gaming. And now it's connecting your politicians and your pro athletes into gaming teams. And now they're investing into esports teams. It's the same way pro sports teams are, if you will, the billionaires trophy on the wall. Esports is very quickly becoming the millionaire investors trophy on the wall, where it's the next cool investment because they see the long-term growth and potential. And we're probably 2.5, 3 years away from seeing a linear TV, even though linear TV is kind of weird now. We're 2 to 3 years away from seeing a linear TV deal for a major esports league where it's hosted on all of their digital platforms, but also on traditional cable TV.
Great answer. Appreciate it. Claire, love to get your thoughts on the same question.
Yes, let's go, Adam. So I actually threw a question in the chat. If you guys wouldn't mind responding, I'm really just curious if there is any participant in here that has cable. So if you do, put a Y in there. But to answer your question, Hunter, I think we actually have to start challenging like mega media brands, because I think actually they're going to need esports and gaming in the future. The way that people, one, we saw it during the pandemic. More esports were covered on ESPN than ever before, and it was likely because there was literally no live events happening, right? So like they needed something. Sorry about that. They needed something to talk through. or to show on their channels as a short version. This is so annoying. Welcome to apartment in New York City life, guys. Here it is, live shot. So the reason why I asked this question is because the way people are consuming content is obviously different. I don't need to tell you that, or anybody in this panel that is a current college student, right? I'm telling you literally how you live your life, which is, you know, from studies, people are looking at House of Highlights, Slam, really highlight reels from the night before. No one's really like sitting down. I should say the next generation isn't necessarily sitting down at a bar unless it's a communal or social team that's tied to their identity, right? So can't really say the same for Ohio State football on a Saturday morning. Obviously, people are going to the bar on campus. If you're on campus, it's a part of like a ritual experience. But generally, no one is like the first quarter starts at this time and final is at this, and we're sitting at this one location watching the whole thing the entire time anymore. So that's why I always challenge this like barometer of esports success based on if it's on a mega media channel or not, because people aren't really viewing it that way anymore. People who actually don't know esports are viewing it that way, and that's why they still don't know esports. So it's interesting, it's fun. I'm excited to see what Twitch continues to do, what YouTube will continue to do in the future. But yeah, we'll see.
It's a great answer. I appreciate it. So we did get a question in the chat, and it was, do you think the definition of esports has been expanding or becoming more restrictive? And then what do you think it should be doing strategically? And what do you think should make something qualify as an esport? So I guess, you know, we'll do it alphabetically again. So we'll start with Adam and then go to Claire.
So I may be slightly different on Claire on this one. I think the definition of esport is becoming significantly more broad, in that anything currently revolving around video games or streaming is labeled an esport, probably by the uninitiated. And by that, I mean anything that's viewed on Twitch right now by someone who's not into gaming is viewed as an esport. And we've also got a terminology issue right now. Gaming in the business sense is now referring to all fantasy sports. So sports betting is now allowed legally across the country. So each team now has a gaming division that is solely focused on sports betting and fantasy sports, not competitive gaming, which is where esports falls into. I think long term, we need to focus on gaming content the same way we do pro sports content. You're not going to look at LeBron James and only want him to ever play basketball and only do basketball content, and that's all he pushes out, right? LeBron plays the game competitively. You can watch it on TV, you can watch it online, and then LeBron does a host of other content issues that don't touch basketball. That's eventually where we're going to want to get to with gaming. If I am playing in a competitive match against Knicks Gaming, that is the esports side of the NBA 2K League. If we're not playing that match, then it's content and entertainment. So my players can go out and stream and do real life stuff. They shouldn't be tied only to the game that they play. And anytime they play the game, that doesn't mean it's an esport. They're just playing a video game and hanging out and having fun. So I think we need to take esports and truly define what is an esport or competitive game versus what's just pure entertainment. Ninja, for example, Ninja at one point in his career was an esports athlete. In the last 5 years, he has been an entertainer and an amazing entertainer, but he's still seen as an esports personality when he is just, he's essentially a vlogger and a live streamer. He's not an esports athlete anymore. He is truly an entertainer.
Yeah, I'll just hop in, like literally same sentiments. Chris, with your question, I agree that people have misused the term esports. And I don't think it's malicious. I think it's in just learning the space. People are classifying all video game play as esports, and that's certainly not the case, as Adam just outlined. So I won't say the same thing Adam essentially says, but yes, like esports is, you know, for basketball reference, esports is the NBA. Video games is like, hey, you want to go play a pickup game at the park, right? It's very different.
I like that.
And I think the big one that bothers me and has bothered me for the last 4 years, I'm taking the reverse path. Claire started running G League and 2K League, and I started 2K League, and now I'm touching G League, and I'm noticing that the valuation comparisons, like esports as a whole, are worth more than the NFL. Well, that's great, except by lumping everything together, you might as well lump every pro sports league in the world together and put it against esports, and then esports is non-existent essentially. Each game as a whole needs to be valued independently of the others because each game has a completely different audience. The CDL, the LCS, the Overwatch League their viewership and their valuation means absolutely nothing when it comes to the NBA 2K League. The same way the NBA 2K League's valuation and information and data does absolutely nothing for the Call of Duty League, the Overwatch League, NALCS. Like those aren't even remotely similar. The same way the NFL and the PLL have nothing in common other than that they're professional sports leagues. And I think that's where esports needs to get to, is to stop being classified as one entity with a multi-billion-dollar valuation and instead take it on the Overwatch League is valued at this. The North American LCS is valued at this. And that's hopefully coming in the next 5 years. But that's when you hear esports is valued at over $1 billion with 700 million viewers. Well, that's an entire industry. That's not just one title.
Great. All right. Well, unless either of you has any like kind of final remarks or anything, we'll probably just wrap it up there. So appreciate both of you coming in and your time and everything else. So obviously really appreciate that. And to those who viewed and everything, thank you as well. So and we'll head to our next panel starts here soon. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. If you guys need anything, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Claire Kaido. Name's right there. Thank you, Hunter. Appreciate you inviting us.
Appreciate you, Hunter.
Yep,
see you, everyone.
Of course.
Bye.
Bye.